that going to the county is your best source to get some of the answers that you may need and understand what it's going to take to get your permits. Can you turn them in person? Is there an online system like 𝐥𝐤𝐬𝐬 or another system that you actually have to submit your permits through? You know, asking the right questions, getting the right paperwork, and understanding what you need to actually get your permits. Like I said, some counties take a lot longer than others. So go down to that county and talk to the people that are at those counties to understand what that process is. That's one of the things that I did when I first started building, especially if I'm building in a new county. I would go down there and talk to them. Once you actually get your survey, once you actually get your set of plans and your plans are approved and you have the green light to be able to go ahead and build, it's also important for you to understand the build process in that county and what inspections you're going to need to go through that process. And they'll give you those inspections. They'll tell you if you can email them, if you can call them in, and how do you actually, go through the process on doing those inspections. Some counties will allow you to do a third-party inspection where you can use your own third-party inspector if they're registered with that county as a third-party inspector. Some counties will not allow you to do a third-party inspection. Some counties will only, allow you to go through their inspection process and only allow their inspectors to actually sign off on the inspection. So it's important for you to understand what that process looks like in each county, because I can tell you every county is different, especially when it comes to inspections. For example, I know that Rockdale in Clayton County, they do what they call a nail pattern inspection after you do your framing. Other counties don't do nail pattern inspections or even house wrap inspections. So when you finish your framing, you can actually do your house wrap and siding in windows without going through an inspection. Other counties have different inspections. So it's important for you to understand what those inspections are. But to back up 1 second, when you get those permits, right, one of the most important things and one of the most underlooked things that I can see, and when I first started building houses, I was guilty of it too, was not having the proper erosion control. Again, your site plan is going to spell out what type of silt fence you need, if you need tree save, and how you're supposed to do your erosion. Erosion is one of the most important things, especially if you have any type of state waters or ponds, because the last thing that you want to do is get erosion into like a state water or pond. A lot of these counties are big on erosion getting into the street. One of the first houses I ever built, I had a situation where I put my silt fence up, and it was maybe a couple months into the project, right? And I wasn't paying attention to the silt fence. So with concrete trucks coming in and out, with lumber getting delivered, the silt fence got damaged. And then we had a really hard rain for about 3 or 4 days, and then mud got into the street. And I actually got fined $5,000 for that erosion. So it's important that you have proper erosion. Not only have it, but also pay attention to it so that it's maintained throughout the entire course of building your project. Typically, most counties, they may make you put your erosion control in first. Sometimes you're able to cut down your trees first, not grade, but cut your trees and put erosion control in. I just had a situation in McDonough. I actually had to cut the trees first because the lot was so heavily wooded. But after the trees were cut, I was then allowed to put down my silt fence and put my construction entrance in. That's a conversation that you need to have with the inspector in the county. Some counties will make you put your erosion down first, regardless, no matter what. Sometimes you may have to cut a path for trees if it's heavily wooded and still put your erosion before you're able to cut the other trees. But understanding what that process looked like at your county is very important. After your erosion control is down, you clear your lot, and you pull your stumps, especially where your foundation is. You never want to like grind stumps where you're going to be building a house. That's a no-no. So you get your erosion control in, you clear and grade your lot, then you're ready for your foundation. One important thing to do is call 811 dig to make sure that they come out and they check for gas lines, water lines, any type of potential hazards that can be under the ground before you start digging. And once that's done, then you can proceed forward with doing your foundation. Now, when it comes to foundations, and I'm just going to talk about like the 3 major foundations here in Georgia that I typically do, that I see most people do. Of course, you got a slab, which is just a slab. Then, you see a lot of crawl spaces in Georgia. We do a lot of those. And then you have a basement. Now, with a slab, it's a little bit different than a crawl space and an actual basement, because when you're ready to start your foundation, the first thing you do is you have the surveyor stake off the 4 corners of the lot so that they know where you're going to start your house. And then they'll start the foundation process. With a slab, they'll actually frame it up and then dig some of the footings. And then you do your plumbing rough first with the slab. Once your plumbing rough passes, then you're able to get the green light to finish doing all the other prep work to be able to get your slab inspected. One key thing that I would tell everybody, and this is very important, especially if you're a new builder, we always hire a third-party inspector. Whether the county allows us to or not, we always hire. They're never going to stop you from hiring. The question is, will they accept it? The reason we hire a third-party inspection is because, one, we know our inspector is going to do a thorough job of inspecting the property to make sure everything is done properly before we actually pour. And it's just an extra layer of security by doing that third-party inspection. So we always do the third-party inspection. But with the slab, once you pass your plumbing rough and you pass your slab, make sure that the footings have the correct amount of rebar, the width and depth is good. You got the right amount of gravel in there. You got your vapor barrier, your wire mesh. Once all that stuff is done, then you have the green light to actually pour. And it's typically just one pour with that slab. Now, when it comes to doing a foundation or a crawl space, it's multiple steps to that. Typically, you do your footing inspection first. Once your footing inspection passed, then you're able to pour your footings. After you pour your footings, then you're able to do either your basement wall or your crawl space wall. Depending on what county you're in and how high that wall is, you may or may not have to have that inspected. Once that passes inspection, or if you don't have to have inspection, then you're able to pour your wall. So now you have your footings, now you have your foundation wall for either your crawl space or your basement. Now, if you're just doing a crawl space, at that point, you're able to move forward into the framing process. Now, if you're doing a basement, you will have an additional pour, an additional inspection. You're going to go ahead and do your plumbing rough for your basement, get that inspected. Then you'll be able to finish all of your prep work for your basement, get that inspected, and then you'll actually get a chance to pour your foundation. So different foundations have different processes. So that kind of covers that foundation process. And foundations are probably, I'm not gonna say probably, foundations are the hardest thing when it comes to building a new house. Because one, weather dictates a lot, especially when you're doing a footing. If you're doing a footing and you have a week where it's a lot of rain, well, guess what? You may not be able to do that footing that week. You may not be able to call in for inspection. You may have to clean the footing out. You may have to wait till it dry out. So weather can kind of dictate that foundation. We're in a situation right now where we're building a house on Darwish, and it was raining like every couple days. So if it was dry, we could have probably did that slab within a couple weeks. But here we are going on week 4, and we just now got the plumbing rough in. So weather dictates a lot. The other thing with foundations, you always want to budget at least 20% when you're doing your foundation, because there are times where you're doing a foundation and maybe a part of the foundation you have some of the land that might be soft. So that's a situation where you might have to make your footing wider or deeper, put more rebar. You might even have to do some type of piers in that system. So foundations are probably, I'm not going to say probably, foundations are the trickiest things to do and one of the toughest process in the house. But once your foundation is done and it's done right, then you can move into what we call the framing process. Now, framing, depending on what size house you build, if you're building a small house, the weather's good, it's not going to take